It started over 200 years ago, an experiment in self-government called the United States of America. No one back then could really tell where it would lead or if it would last. Today, there are democracies from India to Argentina, some stable, some not. Some of us take the freedoms of a government by the people for granted, as if it were a natural right. Others guard it as a fragile thing, as precious as life itself. What if we lost those freedoms? What if those 210 years were erased from the history books? If we awoke one morning to find our destinies in the hands of others, another country, another people, the Russians, for instance, how would we react? Would we fight back? Or pretend that life could go on as before? Pretend that we could remain the same people without those town meetings, the juries of our peers, the election craziness, the Bill of Rights? What would the loss of liberty do to that feisty, funny, self-reliant, spit-in-your-eye, compassionate, and cantankerous thing we call the American character? To answer these questions and ask many more is the purpose of a new ABC miniseries called America. Life in these United States in 1996, 10 years after a Russian takeover. That seems harmless enough. Another bit of thought-provoking entertainment. What would the harm be? Who could object? It seems when it comes to a miniseries called America, everyone has something to say, from the Kremlin to Keokuk. Upset by what they called a pathology of hatred in movies like Rocky IV, Rambo, and Red Dawn, Russian officials made threats to the ABC News Moscow Bureau about America at the same time that ABC was reconsidering the whole project. These coinciding events put America in the spotlight. The New York Times accused ABC of, quote, dumbness squared. The Wall Street Journal accused the Times of blindsiding the network. A top administration official said ABC should, quote, consider telling Moscow where they can put their intimidation.
Marker, the camera mark.
Okay, here we go, please now.
Was ABC proving the validity of their premise even as they abandoned it? Well, they didn't abandon it, and the film was made. The controversy will likely remain, spurred on by the fact that few outside the production have seen Donald Rye's massive script.
What I'm relying on in all of the cases of these camera units is your own individual inventive and creative perception of what you see.
But maybe that hot exchange of ideas is what the movie is all about. Freedom and responsibility. A look at the American character under stress.
The film deals much more with whether we as Americans have the capacity to sustain a democracy, to sustain our freedoms, whether or not there is a reason to have a country called America. These are not, in my view, political questions. They are questions which are fundamental to the existence of the country.
The storm over America will continue in a moment. The story of a Russian occupation of the United States set off a more benign invasion. The invasion of a little town in Nebraska, not by the USSR, but by ABC. The town is Tecumseh, named ironically for a Shawnee chief of the War of 1812, who wouldn't capitulate to the invaders of his day, a young United States of America.
Just the idea of it taking place in your hometown, I think this is what it probably means more to the people than anything.
Oh, we were real excited, just thinking that there's a possibility that they might come.
It's neat that people are finally realizing that Lincoln and Nebraska have more to offer than just a farm town.
If the coming of the movie affected rural Nebraska had its effect on the actors as well.
I'm from a small town in Ohio, and coming back here in the spring of the year makes you remember why God created 4 seasons, and there's something very wholesome and wonderful about the town and about the people, and I'm rediscovering things about my own sense of freedom by being here.
I mean, I grew up in the Midwest, which is what this is. Lincoln is directly in the center of the United States. I think the people here represent the cross-section of America. I think this is where it had to be filmed. It couldn't have been filmed in Florida. Couldn't have been filmed in Los Angeles. The people are too cosmopolitan. This is really the core of our forefathers, our nation.
Small-town America, our nation as we like to think of ourselves. A link to our rural past, to a time, perhaps romanticized, when our ideals meant something, when the dream worked. A setting where the imposition of foreign values would be most pronounced.
I did not want to make a film about the Soviet occupation of America as much as I wanted to make a film about the nature of America today, using this premise as a way to approach that question and a way to examine those issues.
For the actors, the project became a chance to re-examine beliefs as they approached their roles in what had become a media circus. Grammy winner and Oscar nominee Chris Christopherson.
Donald looked more like he had used the device of a Russian takeover of America as a means to explore things like patriotism, like what it means to be an American.
Call to Glory star Cindy Pickett.
It's not anti-Russian, it's not anti-American, it's not pro-Russian or pro-American. It's just a story about people and something that happens to these people, and it's a movie to think about.
Oscar nominee for Swing Shift Christine Lottie.
I feel that the premise is really just a device to explore America, to really take a hard look at American democracy.
Spencer for Hire's Robert Urich.
Freedom and democracy is something that has to be nurtured, something that has to live inside of each one of us, and that if we're not careful, it'll go away.
I never noticed you being particularly interested one way or another in being an American. Damn, I am so tired of this I'm an American bull. Where was all that patriotism when it counted? Where was that willingness to sacrifice? Nobody wanted to join the damn army to defend the country unless they got paid well. Nobody wanted to give any time to public service unless they could make a career out of it. And I didn't notice a lot of us giving up our lives in the last 10 years.
I can't think of a more stimulating, thought-provoking, exciting what-if than the one that's presented in this movie.
Even as this film is shot, it has succeeded on one level, provoking debate, testing the fabric of our society. Earlier in the century, Pulitzer Prize-winning editor William Allen White said, "Unless capitalism is willing to organize, to sacrifice in the renewal and revival of civilization, war will be a failure, and a weary, disheartened world will turn to some totalitarian tyranny." His fears for our freedoms linger in another small Midwestern newspaper office.
In this business, one of the first things to go would be your community newspapers. We would have to have approval of the powers that be for every word that we put in. We wouldn't be able to, I wouldn't be able to editorialize. My thoughts probably wouldn't be what the head honcho's thoughts might be, so I would have to put in his version of what I think, and I wouldn't like that at all.
A lot of people don't even vote, and they should take advantage of that. And it's a good thing we got at least a two-party system in this country. What would we be if we had just one party?
We take for granted the things that we have, and we think it's going to continue on forever. And it may indeed for people my age, but for these kids, it might not.
I do not believe it is the function of entertainment. I don't believe it's the function of film to, narrowly speaking, answer questions. I believe it is the function of this particular film to stimulate the asking of questions.
The Storm Over America will continue in a moment. Images of the American heartland, of a tough, free, tolerant, and self-reliant people, tempered by adversity, touched by compassion. But it is a land in transition, a land of ironies and parallels. The depressed farm and small-town economy depicted in the movie America is unfortunately a reality in much of the Middle West today. The movie portrays the camps of internal exiles, Homeless non-persons, citizens with no hope, no future. The camps are just sets, another piece of Hollywood illusion, but they bear a painfully close resemblance to Depression-era shanties that many Nebraskans remember all too clearly.
There are really people in the world that do have to live in conditions like we're depicting here. Just unreal.
One of the comments I heard 6 o'clock Saturday morning from one of the older fellows that was sitting with me in the grandstands down at the fairground, as he looked at these exiles, he says, you know, I haven't seen anything like that since the 1930s.
I can remember those times were poor. Dad would go on Sunday afternoon, he'd leave and shuck corn for a man out by town. He'd say, we'd come and get him. And then they'd bring him home on Saturday afternoon, and he'd have a $5 bill in his pocket. And us kids, there was 4 of us, we didn't have much.
I know the editor in the paper, for instance, made a statement a couple of weeks ago. He said maybe the way times are going, maybe if you waited 2 more years, they wouldn't have had to have put all the boards up on the windows.
The Depression depicted in the film is not just economic or even political, but a depression of the spirit, a time when hope is hard to come by. Here, resistance leader Devin Milford, played by Chris Christopherson, is reunited with his old love, Amanda Bradford, played by Cindy Pickett.
I recognize your hair. Way over the head. Walking with that little girl.
When we encounter the people in this film, they have been living in a circumstance for 10 years which has seemed to sap their character, has seemed to create a kind of depression. Yet, in the midst of that, they have sense of humor. They have a strength for survival and for perseverance.
For all this, it's just a movie, with sets and props and stunts, with endless waits and starstruck fans.
Well, it's fun watching the transformation of the town and how they do things. There's an awful lot of preparation, more than I ever imagined, getting ready for a film. I've had fun with people peek in the window and come to the door and they'll look in and they'll say, gee, is this a real barbershop or is this a prop?
Ever since we heard about it coming, you know, that's all you hear about in school, at home, downtown, everywhere.
I've talked to many people that have indicated to me that this will probably be the one and only time in their life that they'll ever be able to see anything like this.
We can duplicate the look of displacement, but what about displacement's effect on the human spirit? You can show tanks on Main Street and helicopter gunships hunting down dissidents, but can you capture how it would feel? How can we ever know what it would be like, feel like, to be an occupied nation, a captive people? The storm over America will continue in a moment. The American government was on the run. The enemy had entered Washington, burning the Capitol and the White House. After a 2-day occupation, the invading force retreated to their ships in the Potomac and headed for Baltimore. A scene from ABC's miniseries? No, a page from history. The invaders were British, not Russian, and the year was 1814, the last time that any occupying force was on American soil. Being the only Western Bloc nation and the only superpower spared the horrors and humiliations of occupation or widespread attack on our civilian population, how do we know what it would be like? How did ABC presume to know?
One of the things that interested me was the psychology of occupied peoples, something that Americans have had no experience with. How does a people react to repression? How does a people react to the loss of its freedom?
What about those who have lived under Russian rule? Given the film's premise, how do they think Americans would react? Would the occupiers meet with resistance or collaboration? Polish-born Russian scholar, Professor Richard Pipes.
And you find a lot of people saying one of two things. Look, of course we don't want this kind of a United States. We would like to go back to the kind of United States it was. But we've got to be realistic. That's the word they use, pragmatic, realistic. It is like this. So what we ought to do is to try to concentrate on making it as good as possible. That's what people said in Vichy France. These people are not call Nazi. They just said, look, the Nazis have occupied it. There's nothing we can do about it. Therefore, let us make the best of it. The other group of people will say, well, it's really terrible, but I've got my family to think about, you know, and I have to do the best I can. Of course, I'm a decent person, and I will do all I can not to make things worse for other people. And they're rationalized in this way. That's really how collaboration takes place, and it's a very vicious thing.
Former Soviet diplomat and defector Arkady Shevchenko speculates on the effects occupation would have on the Americans.
All television stations, all radio, all newspapers, everything will say the same thing. Absolutely. No, there will be no difference because it will be entirely controlled by some kind of the central authority. All the news will be the same, and that would absolutely would change mentality and psychology of the people in the United States.
What are they talking about?
Who knows? A lot of political junk. They're all gorks.
Hey, when I get elected Erie Governor General, is that going to make me a gork?
Hey, Dad, if you're a gork, you're a gork. Live it.
What's a Continental Congress?
The United States was formed. Continental Congress met to determine what the form of it was going to be. So there were those who favored a strong central government. These were called the Federalists.
Okay, that's enough, Guy. You go into such detail. It makes me sorry I asked.
What are they talking about?
I don't know, something about a third Continental Congress or something to make America more up to date.
How do you feel about that?
Doesn't matter to me.
Across America, in every corner of the nation, a new day has dawned. Productivity in both the urban and rural centers has increased dramatically.
Peter Degnan, Hoover Institution, Stanford University.
Well, given the enormous hostility which the U.S. has had towards the USSR, and they have had towards us, it'd be a traumatic experience for the bulk of the American population to undergo this sort of a revolution or this takeover, because they know so much about forced labor camps and terror and the killing of innocent people and the gulag, and they've seen how the Soviets operate. So they would be in a deep state of shock.
Rainer Schone, one of the film's actors, has a unique slant on his role of East German occupation commander. He was born in the German Democratic Republic and defected to the West at age 23.
I say something which maybe will not find the approval of a lot of Americans, but as a kid, I'd rather grow up in the GDR because it's safe, there's no drug problems, nobody gets laid off, nobody has no homes or starves as of what you find in a democratic country as this country, or in West Germany where I lived for the last couple of years. But as a grown-up, I'd rather live in the West because the relationship between the people and the government is a sort of a parent-children relationship. You are safe, but you are told what to do and what not to do. And as a grown-up, you don't want that.
How would we react? Would we submit quietly, or would the years of Cold War hastily manifest itself in resistance movements, even in violent opposition? Harvard University's Chris Krugler.
People in this society know how to make trouble when they want to, and we'd see millions of people doing it at once. Instead of one Devin Milford, we'd probably have hundreds of thousands of people like that. Some groups of people would get together and say, what can we do about this? And they would either have some practical expertise or experience, or they wouldn't, but they would begin to form resistance units. And they would begin to hook up with other resistance units, which demonstrates that we don't intend to be digested politically, that we don't intend to behave, and which can be a rallying point for other forms of action.
Would the stress of occupation bring out the best in what we perceive as the American character? Or would it forge a new breed of American we might neither like nor recognize? MIT professor and former National Security Council official Lincoln Bloomfield.
I think maybe it depends on the inherent fiber of the people you're talking about. I have faith that in the American attitude because it's always been optimistic.
I hope that people get out of this a feeling of, like when Kennedy was around, the sense of a kind of patriotism that doesn't have anything to do with, gunboat diplomacy or might is right. Not that kind of patriotism. But patriotism about being free and about purest sense of democracy.
John Kennedy ignited the sense in America that we could all participate in an exciting and productive society in which all of us could be part of a society and could be positive in our personal articulation within the society.
I believe that Thomas Jefferson was right. He said democracy works, but it depends on education. And the most powerful educator ever invented is that lens I'm looking at and the screen in my house.
The storm over America will continue in a moment. The storm over America will fade, but the questions discussed here and in the film itself will continue to be asked as we constantly redefine what our freedom means to us, how best to protect that freedom, and what it means to be an American. Each member of the audience may decide whether or not the film succeeds as entertainment, or perhaps as something more. The filmmakers hope they have provided a look into the heart of the American character. How strong is our democracy? Could it fail us? Would it be our own failure after all? Perhaps this film can be seen as a mirror of us as a people. Our strengths, our failings, our fears, our nobility. An examination of American values and attitudes. A hard look into our national soul. A century and a half ago, French nobleman Alexis de Tocqueville said, "I saw in America more than America. It was the shape of democracy itself." What each of us sees in the film America will be the shape of our own beliefs.